So as I record this video, we're in the midst of Holy Week, which is the week that leads up to Easter, which is this period where Christians commemorate this event that took place that changed the course of history. So I thought it would be worth taking some time to reflect on why everyone except for Google will be taking notice of this ancient celebration of life over death. People should take notice. It's a provocative, even outrageous thing that we celebrate. I think it's easy for us to take the claims of Easter for granted because we've all heard them so many times. But imagine a world in which Christianity, the world's most significant worldview, doesn't exist. A world in which religiosity is usually a projection of ourselves into the world through mythology or archetypes. Like, if you were going to invent a religion, it would probably look a lot like the pagan cults that already existed, with a pantheon of powerful beings and their heroic stories. It would probably reflect our many pre-existing assumptions, values about the world. Our gods would exemplify qualities like strength and power and wisdom and fertility, etc. What they probably wouldn't look like is something like a working class citizen from a conquered people in a desert region who manages to get himself nailed to pieces of timber for upsetting the religious sensibilities of the local authorities. Look at something like a crucifix as if you've never seen one before, and then imagine a group of people holding it up as a triumphant symbol of their faith. You would think they were crazy, and frankly, it is a bit crazy. But that's not the end of the story. The story goes on to say that this same working class person, this Jesus of Nazareth, comes back from the dead after everyone saw him brutally executed. So it's not that crazy after all. Now imagine you encounter someone who makes such a claim like this person, Jesus, who was executed in a brutally efficient manner that is unrivaled among ruling authorities, that this same person who died came back from the dead 3 days later and is now appearing randomly at dinner parties. What if they said they've seen him alive and back from the dead? You or I would probably question their sanity. And that should be any sane person's first response to a claim like that. If someone makes an impossible claim, we should try to rationalize it and make sense of it. In the case of this one, our first assumption would probably be that they're suffering from some kind of a delusion. But what if they don't seem crazy? What if every other indication seems to suggest that they're mentally competent? Well, the other alternative would be that they're lying, because people don't come back from the dead. That's impossible. But what if the same authorities who killed the other guy who supposedly came back from the dead now start to threaten this witness with the same fate if he doesn't change his tune? And that these threats aren't empty, that they actually follow through with it and torture him to death. And the entire time, he persists in his story. Why would he continue to lie at that point? That doesn't really make any sense at all. That doesn't fit with our rationalizations. So we have to go back to the first one, which is that he must have been delusional. But what if he wasn't the only one? What if there were dozens or even hundreds of people who claim the same thing and act the same way when threatened with the same threat of torture and death? Lunacy isn't contagious, and so this rationalization that this is a delusion starts to fall apart when there are multiple eyewitnesses. So maybe we can jump back to the idea that they're lying or that they're swept up in some kind of hysteria. But then you'd think that the threat of torture or a beating or two would really sober them up. But it doesn't for some reason. They suffer through all of that with their story intact. All of these what ifs I'm suggesting are what we find in the story of the historical Jesus and all the things that happened afterwards with this movement called the church. People are often fond of saying that there's no evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And what I think they mean by that is that there's no scientific evidence. Well, the problem is that science didn't exist back then. So it's kind of a convenient objection for skeptics. It's kind of like saying photos or it didn't happen. Anyone who's familiar with our courts of law knows that there are more kinds of evidence than just circumstantial or forensic evidence. There's also what's known as eyewitness testimony or direct evidence, and it's arguably the most important. But yeah, if you're scrutinizing a case, you could cast doubt on a single eyewitness testimony based on their reliability or their integrity. But if you have dozens of eyewitnesses that all corroborate the same story, there isn't a legitimate court in the world that would dismiss that amount of evidence. And again, this is what we have in the historic claims about the death and resurrection of Jesus. His many followers all emerged from hiding afterwards and started to proclaim this story, even under threat of these gruesome, torturous deaths, which many of them suffered. Now, one final thought before I end with this, which is that a lot of critics will reply to this argument by saying that just because people are willing to die for something doesn't mean that it's true. There are all kinds of people who will do crazy things like fly airplanes into buildings because they believe that God has a harem of women, of virgins waiting for them in paradise. That doesn't make their beliefs valid. But in the case of the disciples of Jesus, we're not talking about people who were willing to do something extreme because they had blind faith in it. The thing that they died for was something that they claimed to have personal, first-hand knowledge of. It was something that they claimed to have witnessed themselves. And that's quite a different thing. So this comparison that people who are objecting to the historical argument are making doesn't really hold up. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed that, then please consider subscribing and liking, and come find me on Facebook and Twitter. It's a huge help when you do that. It helps us get these videos in front of more and more people. And a big thank you goes out to You Catholic for presenting these videos. And if you want to support the making of these videos, then please consider supporting my work as a digital media and marketing expert. My company, Holdsworth Design, specializes in branding, web and graphic design, marketing, social media, videography, and all that kind of good stuff. So if you know of a parish, a diocese, a ministry, or a business that needs help in those areas, then please send them our way, and I'm sure we can help them out.